without any further ado, we've got a speaker today, and so I'm going to introduce and hand it straight over to Mike from Cape Radd. Okay, he's going to talk to us, and I'm pretty excited to hear what he has to say. So, over to you, Radd.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everybody. I'm Mike from Cape Radd. As you can hear, I'm from the UK. Got a funny accent, so I hope you can understand me. I pronounce a few things funny, so if you need a re-pronouncement, just let me know. But there's going to be opportunities for some questions at the end, so if you do have any questions, hold on to them. I'll get through the talk, and then we can ask the questions at the end. And basically, yeah, I'm from Cape Radd, Research and Dive Development, and we're a team of marine conservationists, marine biologists, and we are based right here in Simonstown, actually, in False Bay. So we started in 2018, and we've kind of been going and growing ever since. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who we are and what we do. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the area itself and the biodiversity, and I'm going to show you some of the sampling skills that we use, both in the scientific side of things for our sort of research projects there. And also, I want to talk to you a little bit about our citizen science initiatives and explain to you a little bit about citizen science for you guys who don't know. So first of all, well, I know it's Monday morning and you don't want to listen to me constantly for too long, so I've put a few videos in there as well. So we're going to watch a few videos, and hopefully they're reasonably entertaining for you. Do we have any snorkelers, divers, surfers, water people? Quite a few people. People who want to start snorkeling or scuba diving or anything like that? Okay, fantastic. So it's a nice bunch of intrigued people in this subject. So I know you've heard Sea Search come in as well, so they're great to talk about whales and dolphins. So first of all, who are we? So like I say, yeah, we're marine biologists, conservationists, and we run a lot of marine research projects, and we also train young biologists, early career scientists, people who are going to university or at university or recently left university, studying biology of some sort, or conservation or ecology. So people who want to get a bit more hands-on experience from their sort of theoretical side of things that they learn at university or going to learn at university. People who want to get a bit of a taste as to what marine biology is like in terms of the field work and that side of things. So a few pictures of us working on scuba and free diving. So we do quite a few varied things, and I've got a video which is going to show a few. But to start with, I'm going to show you a 3-minute or so video which we've just finished, and it just explains a little bit more about who we are as to what we do for our field course side of things, and also for some of our research that we run. And then a bit of background, just to explain where we come from. So my research as a postgraduate was looking at white shark deterrence, looking into killer whales and how visually killer whales might deter white sharks. So this was done in Mossel Bay. I used to live in Mossel Bay. And I basically spent 3 years towing decoys around the back of a boat, which were the pattern of a killer whale compared to a black one, which was similar to a seal, and looking at how often the sharks attacked or aborted these decoys using underwater cameras. And what we found was, it wasn't statistically significant, but it was what we call a biological trend of the killer whale decoys were attacked a lot less than the plain black ones. Okay. Now, obviously, over the last couple of years, this whole killer whale white shark thing has popped up a lot in False Bay. We're going to talk about it a little bit later on, and we can maybe ask questions at the end. But that was where my research started a few years back. And then Dylan, who you've just seen in that video there, he's currently working on his PhD looking at the white shark population estimates of Southern Africa. So the way he does this is, over the last 20-25 years, people around the coastline have been collecting dorsal IDs like this, fins IDs. On the trailing edge of a white shark's fin, we've got these notches, okay? And these notches are almost like a fingerprint for a shark. And it means that they don't change very often. and we can kind of record the same sharks from year in, year out. So this is all the same shark. You'll see from 2001 to 2005, there's certain notches which are consistent throughout, and we can tell that that's the same shark. And this is how we collect and count sharks. And because we can't tag them all, it's much easier to take photos, take a dorsal ID, fin ID, and then put them into a database and sort of scale out how many there are. So that's sort of the bigger research that we sort of founded on. And then I put a little white shark video in just to treat you for Monday morning. So I'll play a little bit of this just to show you guys. Has anyone been cage diving here? Yeah, a few people. So this was done off a research boat in Mossel Bay when I was doing my shark research. I don't know if there's any sound on it.
The YouTube videos
so it's just music anyway, background music. But yeah, just to show you, obviously everyone knows what the white sharks look like, and this brings a lot of tourism, ecotourism to the area, and there's an awful lot of research going into white sharks. But like I said, this is where we started, but then we decided that to be a marine biologist or a marine conservationist, you actually need to know a lot more than just about how to tag and track white sharks. There's a lot more to it. So we now sort of more focus on the False Bay region, and we're actually Mission Blue champions for the Mission Blue campaign. I don't know if you've heard of that organisation. But they basically champion areas which have got particular areas of beauty or biodiversity. So like I say, we start to focus on kelp ecology now and look at things and animals within the kelp forests of the surrounding Western Cape region. So we're looking at things like fish ID, invertebrate surveys, BRUFs, which stands for Baited Remote Underwater Videos. So there was a video, in that video I just showed you where we threw the thing off the back of the boat, that's a BRUF. We basically put a bit of bait in the bottom there, and it brings in the fish, and we can count the fish that are occurring in the kelp. Mapping kelp and looking at the kelp distribution and how it's growing. So over the last 20-25 years, the kelp has moved and dispersed further and further eastwards. Okay, so that's quite an interesting situation. In many places around the world, Australia, California, Tasmania, kelp forests are actually reducing in distribution because of global warming, climate change, and the warmer waters. And kelp really struggles to grow in those conditions. And also the overhunting of things like crayfish and lobster, and that allows these big blooms of grazers, like urchins, to sort of grow in massive populations and graze through all the kelp forests, and the kelp forests obviously die down. So we're looking at things like kelp grazer densities as well. Interestingly, here in Cape Town in South Africa, we're actually seeing the reverse. So we're actually getting coastal cooling events, which is still climate change affected, but it's actually a cooling event because of the increased intensity of winds, southeastern winds, and it's allowing our kelp to actually grow faster and further. So 20 years ago you wouldn't have seen much kelp in False Bay, and now it grows all the way around to the other side of False Bay and even further east than that. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon that's happening here. So we're looking into the effects and the research of that side of things as well. So there's two sides of Cape Radd. We have sort of our scientific training and our scientific research, which is where qualified scientists are doing research. And then we have our citizen science side. So first of all, I'm going to show you just an example of some of the sampling techniques that we use as scientists to measure things like grazer density, macroinvertebrates, so your starfish and your urchins and things like that, in the kelp forests here. Okay, so just to give you a bit of a flavour as to how we sample in the kelp forest there. So you can see we're using certain pieces of equipment, quadrats and transects, and we've got very strict protocols. We're using scientific protocols. We've got set standard areas of space which we're measuring and distances. And it takes a bit of training and a bit of expertise to do that kind of thing. And then we have our Snorkel for Science, our citizen science initiative. Okay, so this is obviously where we're trying to bring the general public into the marine science and blur the lines a little bit between recreational fun snorkeling and scientific research. And we've kind of made it very, very simple for people to be able to contribute towards scientific research and marine conservation by just snorkeling around. So, has anyone heard the term citizen science before? A few people, maybe? So it is basically where we're conducting scientific research, but the people involved don't have to be scientists. Okay, so it's a really fantastic way of getting the sort of general public involved in collecting data, contributing and giving back to research and conservation without having to go and be a marine biologist, basically, and you can still enjoy the fact that you're collecting data. So one of the initiatives that we're running at the moment is we're trying to, similar to what Dylan was doing with the white shark dorsal fins for the population estimate, we've created a piece of software which now looks at the patterns and the stripes of these endemic benthic sharks in the region. And the software, we take photos like this of dorsal down, we put it into our little machine, and it compares that with all the other shark pictures we've got in the database by looking at all the different spots, all the different markings, and cross-referencing them. And if there's a certain level of similarity, of like 95% similarity, then we can say this is probably the same shark. And by doing this, we can then calculate shark population estimates again with these guys, with these smaller shark species. So what we're trying to sort of create is the fact that white sharks, tiger sharks, all these big, exciting, charismatic sharks are great and they're very important. But these smaller sharks are also super important as well to the ecosystem as a whole. And it's really cool to raise a little bit of awareness of these smaller, less known sharks, especially as they are endemic, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. So yeah, we're hoping that we can help conserve these guys. In the last 10 years, since the last mandate of endangered species on the IUCN, these sharks, 3 of these species of sharks, have gone from near threatened to threatened and vulnerable now. So these guys are vulnerable to fishing and commercial fishing and long lining, but also coastal fishing, recreational fishing, things like that. So hopefully we are helping towards conserving these guys. What have I got now? Oh, another video. So, you're enjoying my videos, guys? So this is just a short video just to give you an idea of what citizen science looks like in the field and how simple it is. We just got normal snorkelers snorkeling around collecting photos and data of fish. And you'll recognise a lot of these places. So basically just creating an experience for people to get involved and be able to help conserve these less known species. So why do we do this? Well, of course, we want to be more aware of what's going on in the water. So instead of just sort of going on a normal snorkel dive, people get to become more aware of your surroundings. You sort of learn a few observational skills, and you're given a specific dive objective. And when you've got a dive objective in your mind when you're going into the water, it makes you sort of look around and think about things a little differently. So it's really nice to sort of engage more with the environment. Contributes to a bigger cause, like I've just mentioned, that conservation of these sharks, these endemic shark species, and population estimates. So if we get sort of in 2-3 years' time, when we've got nice loads of data in the database, we can get a reasonably accurate number for their populations, then we can maybe go to government and sort of appeal for more stricter guidelines on their conservation, create more awareness and things like that. And in the future, people who join us can use this knowledge to enjoy their snorkeling in the future more so. Alrighty, so why this area? Why have I come all the way from Manchester, and Dylan's American, so we always say we're a Mank and a Yank, and why are we here in False Bay? Well, this is an unbelievable area for biodiversity. You guys are so lucky that you live and grow up here and experience this. It's on your doorstep. And a big part of what we do is about explaining to the locals how amazing this is and how much you should care and conserve and care about it as you grow up. Obviously, we've got our megafauna, which we've just sort of spoke about. It's the charismatic stuff that gets a lot of the conservation awareness. It gets a lot of the funding for research. Penguins, lots of different shark species, our Cape fur seals, a few different species of dolphin, a few different species of whale. Those guys who you'll know about, there's a killer whale in town at the moment, a different type of different killer whale to the other shark-eating ones, and so we often get these amazing megafauna in quite big numbers, and it's really, really cool. But why? Why are we getting this biodiversity in this area? Well, it comes down to basically the two currents. Now, you'll all have know about these currents, and you'll all have felt them, because you'll all know the difference between going for a dip at fish hook and going for a dip at Comaki, and the type of cold water that we get. So just to refresh you guys' memory, if you don't know already, it's basically down to these two currents, the Agulhas current on the east coast and the Benguela. So this Benguela current is coming down from Mozambique, from the equator, from the tropical regions, and it's pushing lots of nice warm water all the way down the coastline. It's generally low in nutrients, but it's nice and warm. And what that does is it allows a lot of species which would not otherwise be able to move this far down into the temperate water to be able to push further and further down. And then it kind of hits the continental shelf end and curves back or gyres back on itself into the Indian Ocean. But what happens is we get the knock-on effects of that as the wind pushes these small gyres and these small currents in. And in False Bay, we can often get these knock-on effects of that Agulhas current. And that's why this weekend, if anyone went for a swim, the water here was about 21 degrees. It was absolutely tropical by our standards. So it's beautiful, warm water. And then on the other side, we've got the Benguela current, which is the Atlantic current, and that's the current that we're getting effects of at Comachie and over on Table Bay side. And that is basically a big anti-clockwise current created by the southeast winds that we get. And it sucks water up from the Atlantic. So those trade winds of the southeasters that push up like this, and we all know all about them from living here. From this time of year, and it shifts loads of water up that west coast, and there's no replenishment of the water because obviously there's a big landmass in the way. So what happens? Well, something called an upwelling. We've all heard about upwelling, surely, living around here. And that is essentially where that cold, deep Atlantic water is sucked to the surface. And it's full of nutrients, microscopic nutrients, but it comes up to the surface and it sits there for 2 or 3 days. And when that happens, we get those glorious turquoise blue days where we've got 20 meters visibility when we're snorkeling, and it's unbelievable. Freezing cold, but really, really clean. And then after 2 or 3 days, they photosynthesize like crazy, and it blooms, and it goes green and brown and murky. We've all seen that as well, what we call pea soup. And that is all that nutrients going crazy in the sunlight and then blooming, and that creates a huge nutrient cycle. So there you are, there's a super clean, beautiful clear water, probably about 8 degrees, and then that bloom happens, that algal bloom. And what this is essentially is a huge nutrient cycle, like I say, a big food chain. So the phytoplankton rises up in those upwellings and creates this sort of fog of algae. And zooplankton follows that up the water column and feeds on it. Predatory zooplankton, which will be things like krill and small jellyfish, small crustaceans or baby crustaceans will rise up and feed on the zooplankton. All this nutrients and energy in the water allows things like filter feeders to settle in these areas, these coastal areas where they've got a consistent cycle of food, and that creates habitat for our fish and our invertebrate species. And so these small fish can move in and start grazing off the filter feeders, or start using them as shelter or laying their eggs here where it's a bit more protected. Then the larger fish move in and start eating the smaller fish. Predatory fish move in and eat those bigger fish. And this cycle is happening on a massive scale all over the coastline up to Namibia. And that is basically what allows these megafauna, going back to this megafauna picture, the marine big five, this is what sustains these massive animals in such big numbers, because these guys are obviously all fish eaters. It's also an incredible diversity here of invertebrates. Okay, so this is just a big boulder, and on Boulders Beach they look a bit plain and boring and full of penguin poo. Underwater, they're an absolute incredible mass of life. Every centimetre of these rocks is covered with worms, ascidians, all sorts of everything, and they look quite amazing. And then of course we've got the kelp forests. So the kelp forests fringe the coastline around these areas, and it's what we call a keystone species. Has anyone heard of that term before? Okay, a few of you heard about it. And that essentially is a metaphorical term for, in the old days before they had cement, they used to sort of have these things where, these arches where they wouldn't use cement, but they would just stack the rocks in a clever way that they wouldn't collapse. But it all depended on the keystone. If you were to remove that keystone, the whole thing would collapse and fall down. Now, the idea behind that is kelp forest is the supporter of life in terms of nutrients and food, shelter, substrate, and they support lots of different life within them. And if we do lose the kelp forests like Australia and California and places like that are, then we obviously lose all the life that's within it as well. And we get a lot of unique, endangered and endemic species inside the kelp forests. So another part of what we do at Get Radd is to raise awareness about the kelp forests and show people how beautiful it is. Another part of our sort of outreach initiatives. So there you go, it's a beautiful photo. You can see a little bit closer up how it's covered in invertebrates. The kelp's growing up. Even on the kelp there's lots of things living on it. Alrighty, and then just to sort of round things up, we want to talk a bit about sharks because it's Monday morning and everyone likes sharks, right? So we have the shark diversity here, which is world renowned around the world. People travel from all corners of the globe to come to South Africa to see the sharks here. Now sharks are really, really important members of the ecosystem, and they're what we call the apex predators. We all know that term. And the apex predator basically means, in biology, in ecology, if you think of it like a pyramid, we have our producers at the bottom, and then we have our grazers that feed on the sort of algae, and it works its way up in levels like that, and it gets from high biomass to a low biomass. And the ones right at the top basically controlling the whole system in terms of population and distribution. And that's what the sharks are. They're the apex predators, which are controlling the sick and the old and the not very clever through predations. So when these guys get taken out, it's a really big problem, and everyone knows about the plight of sharks and how longline fishing, commercial fishing, finning trades, things like that, are depleting shark populations massively all around the world. So this is something else that we really need to be aware of. So just to go through some of the species that we have, we've got different sharks, different body forms, different behaviours, different anatomy for different things. So first of all, we've got our offshore species, or our pelagic species. Now, we've got our blue sharks here, and we've got our mako shark here. Now, you'll see a mako shark looks very much like the white shark. It's basically a mini white shark, the same salmon family. And these guys cruise around in those currents offshore here in the warm waters, the warm blue waters, and they'll feed on the tuna and the large predatory fish, yellowtail and things like that. Very fast. This is actually the fastest species of shark in the world. And the blue shark's probably the cutest shark in the world. Eh? Everyone agrees on that. So they're our offshore species. Then we've got our coastal, or our resident species. So these are the species that hang around in the kelp forests, or on the edge of kelp forests, and they live here all year round, and they sort of resident in the kelp forest. So we've got our famous seven-gill, or our cow sharks, and these are a very prehistoric shark, one of the oldest known shark species actually, and they're seven gills. Most sharks have 5 gills. These guys are called seven gills because they've got 7 gills, and that's actually a prehistoric evolutionary trait, so it just shows you how old they are. They look a little bit like an old man with his teeth out, but they do have teeth, and they are known to eat seals. It's thought that they potentially scavenge them, but perhaps they do hunt them in groups as well sometimes. And these used to be prolific around the kelp forests of False Bay, and now unfortunately we're seeing less and less and less of them as the years go by. And now we're lucky if we see one a year around the coastal regions. They have moved, some of them have moved towards Seal Island in the middle of the bay. Now the white sharks have moved away. And this just shows you how shifts can occur from changing the ecosystem by one animal or 2 animals or a few different things. The slightest thing can sort of change and upset the whole trophic level. So the white sharks obviously 2-3 years ago started to disappear, and they used to sort of frequent the Seal Island most of the time in the winter. And these guys would be in the kelp forests around Miller's Point and that kind of thing. And then when the sharks moved away, the cow sharks, a lot of them moved to the island, or a lot of the cow sharks moved away as well. So there's definitely links with everything that happens. And then we've got our gully sharks. These guys are a bit smaller, so the cow shark gets to about 3 meters. These guys will be lucky if you get to 2 meters, but they're quite a cool shark, especially if you see them in the kelp forest. They're big enough for most people. And these guys live fully in the kelp forest, hunting on the fish and things. And, in September, October time, these sharks come in huge numbers around certain areas of the bay there, and we're not sure why yet. We're not sure if they're pupping or if they're mating or what they're doing, if it's just a particularly high food source time of year. But yeah, more research needs to go into these guys because there's not a lot of things known about it. And then we get to our endemic sharks to South Africa. Now, all those sharks are very important and cool and big and charismatic. But their distribution is global. They're found all around the world. So if we lose some here, it's bad, but we might be able to replenish that population from other areas where there's different populations. Now, endemic, if you're not familiar with the term, it basically means they are only found in that one geographical area. Now, that can be a small geographical area or a large geographical area. The most obvious example is the koala. We all know where the koala is endemic to. It's a large place, Australia, but they are only found in Australia. And that's the same thing with these small benthic sharks, these little cat sharks, shy sharks. And the scary thing is, if we do lose these species, then they will never be replaced. We can't just go and find some more somewhere else and bring the population back like we do with certain other species of fish. So it's really important we do conserve them. So just to run through these, we've got our pajama shark. Marine biologists aren't very creative with their naming of species in their common terms. So it's called the pajama shark because it looks like it's wearing pajamas. This is called the puff adder shy shark because it looks like a puff adder. Guess what that one's called? That's the leopard shark because it looks like a leopard. And this one is a dark shark. Okay, not very creative, I know. This basically looks the same as this, but it's much darker. It's not the best picture. So these are the sharks that we're focusing on with our citizen science work, like we just explained. Okay. And then, of course, we've got our migratory seasonal sharks. So the white shark, this is the white shark, and our bronze whalers. So the white sharks are known to seasonally come into False Bay, and they hang around Seal Island in the winter, or they used to, and that was obviously for hunting the seals. So they would come in sort of June, July, or May, June, and they would hang around waiting for those juvenile seals that are born in sort of December, January, and then in May, June they've weaned and they're moving into the water to swim around on their own. Very young, very inexperienced seals hanging around in the water, easy pickings for a big white shark. And then in the summertime, a really interesting thing happened. The males would leave the bay. They'd go, we don't know where, maybe up the coast. We've tracked a few of them up the coast. Some of them go offshore. One was even, well, it's actually a female, but she was tracked to Australia. I'm sure you all know about that one. And then the females generally tend to move into coastal areas. So that's why in the summertime, shark spotters see the sharks, well, they used to see the sharks quite a lot, fish up Muizenberg, that kind of area, because the females moved into those warm, shallow waters where those large fish species like the yellowtail would sometimes pop in and sort of hang out in those shallow, warm waters. The sharks are following the fish. And bronze whalers do a similar thing. They're around all year round, but they have these seasonal movements and small sort of micro ecology movements. So migratory and seasonal sharks, everyone knows the white shark. So I know the first question I'm going to get asked at the end of this is, where are the white sharks? This is obviously a question that everyone wants to know. And right now, no one's really got an answer for it. Part of Dylan's research with his population estimate of the white sharks is looking at also the movements and the trends of white sharks over the years and as they are now. And one thing he's found is that there's obviously less white sharks being spotted in False Bay, but there's more being spotted over in Plettenberg area, Port Elizabeth, and up the east coast over that side. So there's a kind of shift eastwards of shark sightings, white shark sightings. Now, why would this be? Well, if you look at the track, the fish species and their prey species that these sharks are eating, like I say, they come into False Bay and these areas, these seal colonies for winter time. They feed on these on the seals at winter time, but it's not their primary prey. It's like a seasonal treat. Most of their prey is made up of large fish species, and if you look, these fish species are moving further and further east due to climate change issues, global warming and that kind of thing, and also commercial fishing. Now these are commercially fished species. We've got our soup fin shark and we've got our spiny dogfish, and these guys are kind of the meso level. So we've got our apex, which is our big sharks, and then the meso level are these medium sharks, which bigger sharks will eat, dolphins will eat, seals will eat, and humans catch them on long lines. So they're getting more and more overfished every year, and they're being pulled out. Now these are the prey species of our larger sharks, our white sharks, our bronze whalers, those pelagic sharks. So obviously if we take away their prey, then we're going to take away those guys eventually. They're going to move on and find food elsewhere. Now historically over in the Western Cape, we've had huge biomass of these species, but like I say, more and more are being overfished, and it's potentially forcing the white sharks further east, looking for higher densities. And then of course we've got our famous killer whales, port and starboard. So obviously everyone knows about these guys. They came in, they surgically removed the livers of the sharks, because that's really high in fat and good lipids and oils, which is going to be all the goodness basically is in there, and the rest of the shark is just left, dumped. And the few that we did see that washed up on shore, there's 7 washed up on shore, and I think there was 6 or 7 cow sharks as well, so they fed on both. And obviously this was a bit of a shock. It's never been really seen before or documented anywhere before, and it kind of all of a sudden happened. It suddenly happened in 2016, 15, 16, and then it happened occurringly over the next 2 or 3 years until it seemed like there was no white sharks left. Now it's possible that the killer whales scared them off, or maybe completely devastated the population and they kind of moved away. There's not really been any seen since, but the most likely explanation for it is that compilation and mix of all these different things acting all at the same time, and it's basically the straw that broke the camel's back. With the climate change, the overfishing, the population increase of humans, and the long lining of fishing techniques, and these killer whales who are coming in and sort of attacking them, they're getting attacked from all sides, and obviously that's going to end badly for their population and their survival. So although there's no real answer to it yet, people are still investigating, we're starting to believe it's just a mixture of lots of bad things all happening at the same time, accumulating sort of in 2016, which has forced those white sharks away. Some people might be happy about that, if you're a surfer maybe, but I mean, in terms of conservation and the ecosystem, the ecology of the ecosystem, it's quite interesting and serious, because, like I say, we don't really know what the knock-on effects are of pulling a species out of the ecosystem so suddenly. It could have real big knock-on shifts, effects to all sorts of populations, not just sharks, but our kelp forests, our fish, our invertebrates even, and that obviously will have a knock-on effect to humans for our food. Right, I'll shut up now. Your turn to ask any questions. Is there any questions? Yes?
Can you send in photos of sharks that you've taken photos of.
Which ones? Any sharks?
Most sharks that we have in False Bay.
Okay, yeah. Can send some photos through to somebody, link or WeTransfer or something like that. Yeah.
When you said that climate change was affecting the kelp in a positive way, is that better? Is that going to affect it like better or worse in the long run?
Well, again, yeah, that's something we don't know. We say it's being positively affected because it's growing and its distribution is increasing. But remember, when one thing increases, another thing has to decrease to allow that space for that animal or ecosystem habitat to increase. So it's kind of encroaching on bare rock at the moment, and there's not a massive amount of biodiversity on bare rock in those areas. So in terms of biodiversity and species biomass and growth, I would imagine it would be a good thing. And kelp is a really important species in terms of nurseries as well. So a lot of pelagic fish, which spend their first couple of months or a couple of years in the kelp forests growing and being sheltered and protected from predation, when they're big enough they'll go off into the pelagic and replenish the oceans of fish stocks. So that's a good thing. And also in terms of increased water rising and increased storms and severity of storms, kelp forests are a really amazing wave neutralizer. So as the big storms come through, the kelp slows down the erosion of the coastline. So that's another potential positive as well. But in terms of the knock-on effect of encroaching on other areas, then it could have a negative effect as well on some species, which we don't even know about yet.
Do you know why the new killer whale's like in the bay and it's not leaving?
No, we don't. So this one is different. It's not port or starboard, and it doesn't seem to be hunting sharks. The only thing it's been seen to hunt at the minute is a mola or a sunfish, and maybe some bait fish that's been chasing. Initially, they were concerned that it might be sick, because sometimes animals take themselves off when they're sick, but it's been around a long time now and it seems to be acting okay and reasonably healthy. So it could just be, a bull that's taken itself off in its adolescence, and then when they get sort of ready to mate again, they'll go back to their pod and become part of the family again. But yeah, we really don't know much about it at the minute. We're still sea search are the guys who are kind of observing it and trying to record as much information as possible. They actually recorded the first acoustic recordings of a killer whale in South Africa a couple of weeks ago, which is pretty cool. Yeah, we got a question. Yeah, did you have a question?
I have this picture.
Yes.
Is there any way of knowing if this all goes from like the same region as port and starboard on the same pod, or if it's coming from somewhere else?
So the only real way we can tell that is by taking DNA sample. So taking a stable isotope of tissue and then comparing it with port and starboard to see if they are somehow genetically related. So the way they do this is on the boat they've got a big bow, like what's it called, crossbow, and they basically follow the thing, and once they get close enough they shoot it with a crossbow. Crossbow goes in, pulls out a chunk of flesh, and then they bring that back to the boat, put it on ice, send it off to the labs, and then they can do genetic analysis on that. So I don't know if they have done that yet or not, but that's the only real way we can see if they are in some way related. But killer whales are very complicated things. Like there's different types. So they specialise on different dietary specialisations depending on where they are and what kind they are. So we have local ones, or sort of type A ones, which stay in one place and they'll sort of hang around and eat fish and herring and things like that. So there's a few types like that in Canada and those areas, Colombia, America. And then there's transient killer whales, who cruise around the oceans anywhere they want to go, and they'll feed on whatever they find, and they'll specialise in something. So some specialise in hunting baby whales, and they'll separate them from the mother and drown them and then eat their tongue. Some specialise in stingrays, and some specialise in sharks, or bony fish, or squid or whatever. So they're opportunistic, and then at times they do specialise in certain dietary requirements. So a lot to learn about orcas.
Whenever you take like an estimated guess, because don't you have different groups of whales that look fairly similar but different to other groups? But wouldn't it be possible to make an estimate on where it should be coming from?
Not really, because if they're transient, they've basically got a global distribution, so it could have come from anywhere. So those transients can move all over the world, and there's obviously quite a few of them. So it could have come from, and it could be completely separate or nothing to do with port and starboard, which is the most likely option. Or it could have come from some kind of lineage through port and starboard that are linked with their family. But it's unless we take DNA, we really can't take us. From the eye, we can take dorsal fin shots as well. That just shows you the individual. It doesn't show you their sort of connection genetically. Another.
Sorry. Do you think fish population's gonna maybe, if we're lucky, increase, and like the original resident species, like the bluefin and stuff, will come back?
I think I'm a conservationist, so I have to be positive and have a positive outlook. So there is some good news stories. It's not all doom and gloom. There's lots of stories of fisheries being closed, like in the North Atlantic. They closed the cod fishery for 10 years, and then when they went back, they found that the cod had replenished and some, and it was a huge amount of fish stocks, and they could start fishing again back to the normal levels. There's a few stories like that where they reduced the stock catch for a number of years, and they have to heavily enforce it, and they let this populations replenish and grow back, and then fishing can rise back up again. But at the moment, about 80% of fish stocks are at the point of collapse, which basically means if they take past this amount of collapse, then they won't recover back to what they are unless it's completely stopped. And then there's things like genetic bottlenecking, where there's too fewer species to create a healthy stock of. So there is good news, and things like marine protected areas and fishing rules and legal legislation that reduces fishing catches. But there's a lot of bad news out there as well. I personally think things will recover. I don't think we'll let things hopefully get to the point where they're completely gone. I mean, eventually it gets to the point where there's just not enough of them and they don't become commercially viable anymore. So you'll find the fishermen just stop fishing, because the fishermen only care about things that they can make a lot of money from. So once it becomes commercially unviable, they'll move on to the next thing. And then maybe that's the chance for the species to come back. New one.
Is your citizen science swapping, is that happening at the moment?
Yeah, that's continuous. So we try and do that all year round, so we can have data from in the winter, in the summer, wet, dry, all different conditions, different areas. So we run that all the time. Most of it weekends, but it's constantly running that just to keep the data ticking in. And we have a website called FinSpotter. So if you guys go out and you have underwater cameras as well, and if you take a photo like that dorsal shot, if you go to FinSpotter, you can submit that picture onto our database yourselves, and then you'll get a little email that says thank you for contributing to our research. And then if that shark is spotted again, you'll get another email to say your shark has been spotted here. So you might see it in Long Beach, and then it might be seen again in Fishhook, and it'll tell you where it's moved and how it's moved and how long it's been and that kind of thing. So it keeps you up to date on all the movements of it.
So not very scientific, you could name it yourself. Not scientific to give it a name.
Yeah,
And
you
then
can name it
see
yourself.
where Joe is moving.
Exactly.
Last question, just other question. Done.
Has South Africa looked into anything like fish farming?
Yeah, there is quite a bit of fish farming, especially things like abalone. They're trying to sort of supplement the market, or like flood the market with farmed abalone to reduce the obviously the poaching and things like that. Fish farming is is a thing, and it is generally a good thing, but it does have its negatives as well, especially high intensified fish farming. Basically, if you have a lot of fish all in the one place being fed the same thing, and it releases a huge amount of nitrates, and then nitrates create very harmful algal blooms, and that creates eutrophication, which is basically where all the algae sucks up all the oxygen out of the water, and everything in that area dies. So it's quite a tricky one. It's quite a science. And it also, a lot of, if it's wild fishing, a lot of other species get bycaught in it still, even though it's farming. But yeah, it is an alternative to wild storage, and it is happening in South Africa.
I'm just checking. Anybody else got a question before I end off for today? Yes.
Sorry.
You want the last word, it's okay.
With species that aren't found that often in False Bay area, would you still document them, like hammerheads and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's sometimes more important when we see obscure animals, which is why the killer whale's creating so much interest, because it's sort of unusual. So yeah, if anything marine related that is unusual. An example of that is Long Beach at the minute. There's a pineapple fish. Now, pineapple fish are quite a funny animal if you've not seen one. It's a fish that looks like a pineapple. Again, creative name. And they're generally found in warmer waters. But this one's been at Long Beach for the last sort of nearly a year now. And it's quite unusual to see those guys this coastal and in this waters. So everything that's of interest in the marine is good for us.
You going to be around for like another 10 minutes? Thank you very much, Mike, for coming to speak to us today. Thank you guys for listening quietly for so long. If you want to come ask more questions, Daniel, possibly, Mike will be around to answer more questions if you have something that you've thought of. Since I'm not releasing you yet, Kevin's here and he wants to talk to you quickly about something that he's starting at Peak. But before you do that, sorry. Thank you very, very much. Next up.